Hello and welcome, and thank you so very much for being a part of our community and joining us today for another inspirational message. My name is Brother T. I'm co-founder of True Thought Spiritual Community, and I'm very excited to be back with you today. We've been talking these last few weeks about the keys to the kingdom, and there is an element to this that we talked about in our Inside the Message discussion on Wednesday night. And also, I think my wife alluded to it, Reverend A alluded to it last Sunday, and that is humility. So today, our topic is going to be about humility and how does that weave its way into the keys to the kingdom and why is it so important? So before we begin, let's join together for a brief moment of silence. Let's take a good deep breath for just a moment. And so we say thank you, Mother, Father, God, for joining us today in this inspirational message, for being with us in spirit, in the energy and vibration of love. We ask to be joined and informed by the voice of wisdom, that we are led to know and understand ourselves in a new way today through this teaching. And so it is. Mm. Well, humility is something that takes me way back to when I was just going into the first grade. And I had already become quite uh, certain and quite confident of myself because my grandmother was my first experience of what I believe to be really unconditional love. She loved me and expressed love to me in a way that was, I felt uniquely unconditional. I felt truly loved. And I visited with her often, and my mother was working, I think, already at that time. And so she would take me to visit my grandmother or to be with my grandmother, and she would keep me during the day. And it was just, well, it was like heaven, right? I was being loved and allowed to do or encouraged to do things. And, she would teach me, and I was a very curious young man and young boy, and she would teach me, you know, she was showing me because she would sew and she would cook and she would do things. And my aunt and my grandfather, the three of them lived together, and she was still caretaking my aunt to some degree at that point. And my grandfather was quite quite well, but he was very quiet man, and so he would be sitting and watching TV, and they would listen to uh, the Paul Harvey show, and they listened to the radio. This goes way back, right? But I got to just kind of participate in their life and hang out with them, and it was really a tremendous joy for me. And so when the time came, I was going to go to the first grade. Yeah, I was excited. I had the books of the pencils and the paper, the little notepad that I had to get, and the book satchel, and the lunch box. I mean, I had all the stuff and some new clothes, and I was going to go to school. I had one older sister that was 2 years older than me, and so she was already, had gotten comfortable with the process. But the school was literally just a few blocks away from where my grandmother lived. So it was really convenient for my mother, to just have me stay at my grandmother's anyway, because it was convenient for my sister to go to school. And that had been going on for a couple of years up to that point. But the point is that now it was my time to go. And so we go for the first day of school, and they they kind of put us all into what I'll say is basically like a basketball court. It was a gymnasium, and we were just standing along the walls, and the teachers would be called out, and so it was like, okay, Miss Mary Litchford, first grade, and everybody follow her, and that was my cue, and I was standing there with my mother, and that was my cue to go to Miss Litchford's room. Well, suddenly I decided I didn't want to go. I didn't. I didn't need to go to school. What would I need to go to school for? I mean, life was really good. There was nothing that needed to be improved on, as far as I could tell. And I was arrogantly going to be stubborn. And so I just started doing what, the only defense that I knew that really worked pretty well at that time was to cry. And so I started crying, and I didn't lay down on the gym floor and start kicking my feet up and down and screaming, but I was just like, I don't want to go. I don't need this. I was being very stubborn. And I don't want to do this. Why would I want to do that? I didn't want to subject myself to being in a class with all of these strangers, all these other kids, who I'd never seen before. And I didn't recognize, but, obviously I was fearful. I was very fearful. But at the same time, I was very certain that I didn't need, this education. I think I could be just fine without it. So anyway, the teacher came over to where we were standing, and the rest of the students had kind of been okay with it, I guess. But so I was the last one in the room, and the teacher came over and told my mother, said, "Well, just bring him into the room." So my mother's holding my hand and takes me into the room, and I'm standing there, just kind of inside the doorway, and the other students are already at their desk. Everybody seems to be okay with it except me. And the teacher reached down and grabbed my hand, and she's holding my hand, and my mother's holding my hand, so I'm like this. And the teacher starts talking to my mother, and she's saying, well, he's going to be okay here. He's going to have a good year. He's going to have a good first day. And suddenly I didn't hear anything that she was saying because she began to squeeze my hand. And the more she talked, the more I resisted, like I was resisting, she started squeezing my hand. And the more and more she squeezed my hand, it became very painful. And I recognized something completely different. I realized, Mom, I'm going to be okay. Now I'm telling my mom, yeah, oh, I get it. I'm going to be good, right? Because it dawned on me that the only way that I was going to get out of that situation was to be humble enough to submit to this teacher, and she was the authority, and I had to let go of my certainty that I didn't need school. I had to let go of my ideas. I had to be humble enough to even tell my mother, "Okay, Mom, you got to go. You got to go because Miss Mary Litchford here, she's got this, and I'm good." Well, my mother left, and there was a seat right at the front of the room. I remember this just like it was yesterday. And Miss Mary Litchford said, "Well, you sit right there." And here I am at the very front of the room. Well, I promise you, she had my full attention. She had my full respect almost instantly because she subtly took control of my disbelief. And it was an amazing year. I actually ended up being a straight A student. That was the only year I remember in all the first 12 grades that I was a straight A student that whole year because I ended up loving her. I ended up respecting her at such a level of appreciation that a few years later, actually, when I was in high school, she had retired, and I went and visited her at her house, and we had a wonderful conversation. Her name was Mrs. Mary Litchford. Now, I'll never forget those experiences, but the point of the story is to be humble, is to recognize, is to actually, as far as the ego is concerned, is to be humiliated. And that's not necessarily a comfortable way of thinking about you being humble. But my ego was humiliated. I was willing to embarrass my mother and anybody else around to get out of that situation, right? I had no problem with that, right? I didn't care about that. What I wanted was what I wanted. My ego was absolutely in control and wanted to get its way. But as soon as Miss Mary Litchford helped me to see that there was another way of being, and that was brought about uh, through her squeezing my hand and getting my attention. And from that point on, I was glad to please her. I'm not saying that she wasn't a mean person. She wasn't an evil person. That was an act of love. Now, in today's world, that might even be considered abusive or unloving. But I'm here to tell you to get my attention and to do what was necessary to wake me and shake me out of my ill perceived idea of what was important for me. It was a beautiful exposition of love. And I did indeed love her. And so that little story has had an influence. Her initial first teaching in the first grade, that was her first teaching for me, had an influence on me for the rest of my life. And I appreciated authority wherever I would go. Later in life, in college, later in life in the military, later in life with my bosses and employers and so forth. It also translated into some respect for my parents at times in my life as well. Why is humility so important in our spiritual pathway? Well, we've talked about the four keys to the kingdom. We talked about desire and intention, allowance, and surrender. And those are the four keys to the kingdom that we've talked about these last couple of weeks. And we spent the month of a whole month of February on talking about forgiveness. And so forgiveness is an attribute, a characteristic. It's an activity actually of being prepared for this journey of ascension. And forgiveness is absolutely critical, important to this process. But as we begin to delve into the deeper understanding of these keys of the kingdom, I wanted to add that humility is a characteristic in all of the levels of consciousness, in all of the keys to the kingdom that we need to be conscious of. Because without humility, we will not allow ourselves. The ego is not very humble. You may have known. I'm not talking about the fake humility, that's been taught even in some religious structures, being gracious and pretending that, oh, I'm so glad for the applause. Thank you so much for loving me. And, oh, you don't need to do this. You don't need to give me that applause. You don't need to show me that love, whatever, but inside telling the self or the ego telling itself, yeah, give me more and more and more kind of thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about true humility, which is to know this very thing. I did not create myself. I am a creation of love. I am the creation of God, right? I am a creation of source, universal consciousness, the God, goddess, whatever the label or name you need to give it to feel comfortable with it, but to know that you are the creation of that capital S source. And that's one of the most instant ways for us to become humble and to express humility is because we're on a pathway to begin to know ourselves in a new way. We're also on a pathway to begin to know how to be in a new way, to be expressing in a new way, and to begin to know ourselves in a way that heretofore, through the constructs of the ego and the world, has really been bypassed or been ignored, I would think would be maybe a better way of saying it. So humility helps us to see that no matter what's going on as we evolve in this pathway, you may come to a point as a teacher, and yes, you are a teacher. All of us are teachers. Everyone is teaching continuously. We're teaching what we believe continuously throughout every day. We're teaching what we believe. We're teaching what we believe because we become observable in our expression of those beliefs. And when we get to a place, and you will, where people begin to recognize you as a minister, they begin to recognize you as a person of wisdom, of spiritual wisdom, because you're studying this pathway of evolving consciousness. They will come to show appreciation and recognition. And the ego, even Jesus, shares in the Way of Mastery that, it would have been easy for him to say, oh, I'm healing people. I'm doing all these things. I deserve his adoration or whatever. He said that even the ego was tempting him, trying to tempt him even then, you know, to take credit for what was. But as we know, he would always say, all power to God, right? All power to God. Without this connection with God of my own self, I do nothing. And so that's really important for us, even in the beginning stages, as we learn about how to be a master along this spiritual journey. It's really important for us to understand that humility is a characteristic that we should rely on and fall back on and adhere to continuously through our growth and through our graduation through the levels of consciousness as we continue to evolve in our mastery of spiritual understanding. And so it's very important for us to know that as things come to us, the Holy Spirit is responsible and could be responsible to bring thousands of people to your doorstep, literally, because you're teaching truth and you're doing it in a pure way. In other words, humbly and recognizing and knowing that you are just letting the energy of love flow through you. And so as we teach these next few lessons, these keys, I should say, as we teach that over these next few weeks and months, and we keep coming back to these because these are like cornerstones of this foundation of this glorious house that we're building. You begin to, through humility, you begin to realize and experience your own grandiosity, your own amazing perfection that you are. And humility is required because we're on a journey of becoming ever closer, if you will, to love, the mystery that God is. And we never will truly come to be done on that process. And as soon as any of us feel like, I've read that book, I've got it, I've got that down, I know, as soon as we start getting to those points when students may come to you for guidance, and if we ever get to the point and allow the ego to take over our perception of ourselves as that we are a master, those are little trips that the ego will use to try to own our spiritual journey. And so the master, the teacher of the student, is always in recognition that he's always a student. Humbly, we are always a student of truth. We're always a student of this journey of becoming ever closer to love, to our source, capital S source, because we did not create ourselves. So anytime you're feeling, and you may have seen people that, and we call it arrogance in the world, the ego's perspective, but whenever we see any spiritual leader or anyone that claims to know, everything, or with all this certainty and all this stuff that they've got spirituality figured out, they've got it all figured out. They may have some clue about their own spiritual journey, because everyone's spiritual journey is unique to them. But the point is, that's the time to step away from that teacher. It's time to become your own teacher, and begin to recognize, because that's not, if you don't experience and know real humility in the people that you're working with and your spiritual journey, and understanding that for yourself as a characteristic that we need to embrace for ourselves day in and day out in all that we're doing. We're kind of letting the ego, take over, and kind of runs back to the front of the bus and grabs the steering wheel out of our hands, instead of letting the Spirit run our story and run our direction and run our journey, and taking us gently into a higher and higher experiences of bliss, literally. We miss out, and we're back kind of and kind of lost again. So this whole process that we've shared with you so far is actually simple, but these small characteristics, um, these small teaching points and the axioms that we're going to be teaching you over the next few weeks and months are really important that we begin to keep these in our notes and keep these in our thoughts. And so I wanted to share that with you today and leave this with you for the week to think about, where can I practice humility, true humility, this week as I go through my week. When I'm in relationship or working with people this week, or I'm working with people in my home, love is showing up for us through the people in our lives. And I know you know that. I know that you are aware of that, and that you are truly blessed by the people around you. And I am truly blessed by the people around me. I am truly blessed by your presence here, just watching this episode today, this inspirational message. There is so much to be grateful for. There is so much. Uh, but sometimes we can get all full of ourselves, and that's the time to remember, I didn't create myself. And so we can close our eyes, take a good deep breath, and turn within, and just simply remember, God created us, and we are here with an intentional purpose to remember that. That is who we are. We are also here with an intentional purpose to remember how we were created through God and become the channel for love, become the expression, and allow God become the vessel. Like the wave on the ocean, it's directed not by itself. It's directed by the forces that brought it into expression. And we are as well. We are directed by the forces that have brought us into expression here in form, to help our brothers and sisters and to help ourselves to remember and know who we are in love, and to become ever closer to that love, and to know and experience bliss more and more and more as we journey forth through our life. That's my inspirational message for today. Thank you for hanging around. God bless you for being part of our community. We love you. Thank you for your support. You can find us at truethought.org, truethought.org, and we appreciate your love and support. And we look forward to talking with you again soon. Bye-bye.